Good morning, friends. We are starting a new module today. It is the module of Talmud. Talmud, what is Talmud, Chuck? Talmud is the oral Torah. Talmud is the oral Torah. So you've learned Tanya is the secret Torah. Don't confuse your Torahs. When Moses descends from Mount Sinai, let's put things into perspective. He brings with him the 10 Commandments, which are engraved on 2 tablets of sapphire. We've heard about the 10 Commandments, right? Then there's the 5 books of Moses. That's the written Torah. But together with the written Torah came an oral Torah. The oral Torah incorporates the Mishnah and the Talmud. That's what we're about to learn. In addition to that, there was also a secret Torah, which is also known as the Kabbalah or mysticism, which incorporates Kabbalah and Hasidus inside of it. Okay? So what we're doing today is, we've spent a lot of time here as a community learning the Parsha of the week, and God willing, we'll continue that. We've learned spent a lot of time learning Hasidus, but I think it's time for us to take on a tractate of Talmud, which means we start at the beginning, we go to the end, and I'm just experimenting today with one chapter of Talmud. We're using a book called the Ein Yaakov. Now, the Ein Yaakov, here it is. The Ein Yaakov means the eye of Jacob. It is a collection, a 16th century collection of the stories and juicy parts of the Talmud. The juicier parts of the Talmud. See, because the Talmud is like an ocean. You can bump into a whale and a crab and a dolphin and a killer whale. It's just all mixed up. But because the Talmud is a mixture of law and history and geography and philosophy and psychology and stories, and it's all mixed up together. So what the Ein Yaakov does is that it actually removes or separates the parts of the Talmud that are the juicier parts of the Talmud, so that we can study them without getting stuck in the technicalities of the Talmud, the drier parts of the Talmud. Now, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, says that the study of Ein Yaakov, I don't remember the exact words right now, but he says that the study of Ein Yaakov, let's see exactly if I can find it, has a profound impact on our spirituality. Let me see. Here it is. Yeah, the Alter Rebbe says, show respect to God, and every weekday before nightfall, between Mincha and Ma'ariv prayer, one should learn in a quorum of 10 the mystical elements of Torah, namely the Agada. Where the Agada means like the legend, these parts of Torah that is found in the volumes of Ein Yaakov. If you wish to know He who spoke and brought the world into being, if you want to know God, learn Agada. This is Agada, which is the legends of the Torah. For through it you come to recognize the Holy One, blessed be He, and cleave to His ways. That was a direct quote from the Sifri, which is a medrash. Now, from the Arizal, learning Ein Yaakov, he says learning Ein Yaakov atones for one's sins. And from the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, he says the midrashic teachings are called Agada. What does Agada mean? Unity, because they bring together Oged, all the Jewish people. Okay? So that's basically what the Agada is all about. And we're going to deepen our spirituality right now as we go into it. We're going to start here on page 274 in the Ein Yaakov. Again, we're doing a bit of a beta run here, a bit of an experimental run. So we're going to go straight into it and just see what happens. Okay? 274. The Mishnah mentioned the 3 daily Amidah prayers. So this is the 4th chapter of Tractate Brachos. So Tractate Brachos is the first tractate of the whole entire Talmud. This is the 4th chapter of Tractate Brachos, which is a chapter that's associated with prayer. A lot of the laws of prayer we learned from this chapter. So I figured, you know what? It would be nice if we took this particular chapter for us as a group of people that pray together to learn the Gemara about prayer. Wouldn't that be lovely, right? So let's go. The Mishnah mentioned the 3 daily Amidah prayers. We daven Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, morning services, afternoon services, and evening services. 274, we're in the middle of the page, right? 274, right in the middle of the page. The Gemara cites a dispute of Amoraim as to the source of these 3 prayers. Amoraim are the sages of the Talmud who lived in the days of the Talmud, as opposed to the Tanoim, who were the sages of the Mishnah that came before them. It's just about time periods. So what then is the source of the 3 daily Amidah prayers? You know that the essence of each prayer is the silent Amidah. Silent Amidah, what's called the Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings, right? So in the morning, afternoon, and evening services, each one of those prayers has an Amidah, which is like the skeleton, the backbone, the spine of the prayer. The question is, what's the origin of the Amidah prayer? Says Rabbi Yossi, the son of Hanina, the Avois, the forefathers established the 3 daily tefillos. It was our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham established the morning prayer, Shachris. Yitzchak established Mincha, the afternoon prayer, and Yaakov established Ma'ariv, the afternoon prayers. Now, if you look in the note 1, this does not mean that the sages composed the very words of the Shemona Esrei as we have it, because who composed the words of our prayers? Does anybody know? It was the men of the great assembly. Anshe Knesses Hagadola. Yes, the Sanhedrin. Who were these men? Who was the Knesses Hagadola? Today in Israel, it's called the parliament. It's called the Knesset, right? Knesset means like the parliament, right? But the Anshe Knesses Hagadola, the men of the great assembly, these were one specific Sanhedrin. It was exactly when the Jews left Persia, Iran, to come and build our second temple in Jerusalem. Which means after the Jews came out of Egypt and they finally built their first temple in Jerusalem after King David and King Solomon, then the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. They were then taken into exile into Babylon, Iraq. The Iraqis were conquered by the Iranians, the Persians. There, the Purim story takes place in Iran. After the Purim story, Esther's son, Darius, the Jew, Esther and Achashverosh's son Darius the Jew is now the leader of the free world. Well, I wouldn't call it the free world. The leader of the world, and he elects to send the Jews back to Israel, and he funds the construction of the second temple. So who now? The Jewish people are in a pretty good position right now. You got Mordechai, whose other name was Malachi, according to the Talmud. Malachi the prophet, the last of the prophets. His name was Mordechai, Malachi. There are opinions that it wasn't him, but let's go with the opinion that says it was him. There was Zechariah, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. These are the last 3 of the prophets. There was Ezra, thank you, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel. These were men of the great assembly that basically made their way back to Jerusalem, and they were the one that formalized Judaism the way that we know it today. The word Sidur, a prayer book. Sidur does not mean prayer book. Prayer book would be Sefer Tfilah. That's Sefer Tfilah is a prayer book. Sidur means organized. That's what Sidur means, organized. Why? Because the men of the Great Assembly, they realized that people did not know anymore how to pray extemporaneously. They just didn't know how to do it. They lacked creativity or spiritual sensitivity to be able to extemporaneously pour out their prayers before God. So therefore, the sages, the men of the Great Assembly, formulated a template for prayer called the Sidur. They did the same thing with the Passover Seder called the Seder. They made a Seder. Right? 90% of Judaism, the way we know it today, is formalized and made into templates by the men of the Great Assembly. So back to the origins of our daily prayers. Where does this come from? Well, it's founded on our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, morning, afternoon, and evening. But who actually wrote it down was the men of the Great Assembly. They did this this is formulated later by men of the Great Assembly in Yavne. The Avos. Now, Yavne, interesting. Yavne is very interesting. Yavne would have been a later Sanhedrin. Yavne happened only after the second temple was destroyed. We have to check the Gemara in Megillah 17b and 18a to figure out which exact Sanhedrin was the one that wrote down the formulation of the prayers. It could be that the men of the Great Assembly that came from Iran, they maybe initiated the templates, but the templates were formalized by a later Sanhedrin after the destruction of the second temple. Remember, by the way, something very important also, which actually makes a lot of sense now. The reason why the sages moved the Sanhedrin to Yavne is because Jerusalem was being destroyed. If you remember the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was the leader of Jerusalem at that time, during the time of the Roman siege in Jerusalem. Now we're moving to the second temple's destruction. Not the Babylonian destruction, but the second temple's destruction. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai managed to smuggle himself out of the city Very complicated story in the Talmud. And there he presents himself before Vespasian, the general, and he tells Vespasian, you are about to become the emperor. Long story, but Vespasian was very impressed with this prophecy. He liked that. So he said, Rabbi, I'll give you whatever you want. And the rabbi asked for three things. He asked for Jerusalem. No, sorry. He asked for the sages of Jerusalem to be spared and to be allowed refuge to study Torah in Yavne. That the Torah should be given safe passage to Yavne, right? Which means even though Jerusalem as a city was destroyed and the temple as the heart of Judaism was destroyed, the center of Judaism moved to Yavne, which now became the heart of the Jewish diaspora. Right? So now at that point, the focal point of the Jewish prayer used to be in the temple. Once the temple was destroyed, it makes sense that they were the ones. That Sanhedrin in Yavne was the one that formalized the final prayers and made them official. The Avos, the forefathers, merely established that a person should pray 3 times daily using whatever word he wants. And that comes from the commentary of the Maharsha. Back to the Talmud. We're going to jump up and down. That's how Talmud works. You jump up and down. It's hyperlinks. Okay? So back to the middle of the page of 274. Rabbi Shua ben Levi disagrees with the first opinion of Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina. He says that the rabbis established the tefillos, the 3 prayers, corresponding to the daily Tamid offerings. What are the daily Tamid offerings? The daily Tamid offerings are the daily biblical command that we should offer an offering every morning and offer a sheep or a lamb every afternoon. Once the temple was destroyed, in the story I just told you, the sages said, well, how are we going to serve God in the daily morning and daily afternoon offering? They said we have no choice, but we're going to replace that with our prayers, with our verbal lip service. And that's why you'll notice that in the prayers, we often mention the sacrifices, the animal offerings in our daily prayers. Why are we doing that? Like, what is it, some biblical reading that we're learning about random animal offerings that were performed in ancient times? No, because our prayer is actually in replacement of that daily offering. So that's why by reciting it, it's considered as if you offered it.
You say prayer, you're talking about the Amida specifically, or the entire service?
I'm using the word prayer liberally, so loosely. So so the prayer would incorporate not just the Amida itself, but also the expanded, the whole service, basically. Okay, let's take a look at note number 2. The Torah commands that 2 lambs be brought as ola offerings. That means burnt offerings each day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. These offerings are called tamid, which means continual offerings, because they are brought without fail every single day. The morning prayer, which is recited in the morning, corresponds to the morning tamid. And the mincha prayer, which is recited in the afternoon, corresponds to the afternoon tamid. What about Ma'ariv of the evening prayer, which is recited at night, corresponds to the burning of the fat and limbs of the afternoon tamid, which takes place at night. You actually burn the remainder of the afternoon offering. You burn it all night. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that there's an interesting story, a very painful story of the Roman siege in Jerusalem, that they were unable to break the siege, to break the city of Jerusalem. They were unable to do it. And the Talmud in Brachos later, somewhere in Brachos later on, tells us, 55, tells us that there was an old Jewish man who told the Romans the secrets of the Jewish deterrence. He said, what's the secret? As long as they're offering these daily offerings, you'll never be able to break them. What was going on was that the Jewish people in Jerusalem were paying money to the Romans outside the city to give them 2 lambs every day. And they would lower like a little basket with the coins. They would give it to the Romans, and the Romans would put in 2 lambs. This was like a deal. There was like a little black market going on during the siege. And they realized that what they were doing, this Jewish sage, this Jewish man told them that as long as they were offering the daily offering in Jerusalem, they would never be able to break the siege, to conquer Jerusalem. So what they did is that one day, is that instead of putting 2 lambs in there, they put 2 piglets in there, knowing that the Jews wouldn't be able to offer that unkosher animals. As it comes up, and the Jews realize that there are two pigs in there, the Talmud says that the pig kind of stabbed the wall with his foot, and the wall shook, and that represented the beginning of the end. So it's these daily offerings that are very, very, very profound. And when we come to shul in the morning and we daven in the afternoon, we're connecting with that kind of energy. And I put that into the context of what's going on in Israel today. Think about the fact that we're fighting an existential war of survival, not only in Israel, but around the world, right? and that the daily Tamid offering somehow holds the key for us to be able to deter our enemies. I just want you to realize how meaningful is your morning prayer and your afternoon prayer. You are representing the defense of the Jewish people. Let's keep it going. So we had two opinions here. One opinion was the origin. Oh, Warren Alec is with us. Shalom Aleichem. We were just talking about you in shul today. Good morning to you. Stacy and Marty from New Jersey, and David is from Ben Gurion International Airport. David Weinberg. What a pleasure. Yeah, he went to Israel for 3 weeks with his kids, visiting his parents. David, hope you had a beautiful flight and have a wonderful and safe and successful time in Israel. And of course, Leah Feingold. Great to see everybody here. Good. So we have two opinions as to the origin of our prayers. One is based on the forefathers. A second one is based on the daily offerings, right? The Brisa comments. There's a Brisa that supports the Rabbi Yossi, the son of Chanina, the first opinion that the tefillah is the prayers were instituted by the sages. And there is a Brisa, there is oral law support to Rabbi Shimon Levi that there was the rabbis who established that tefillah is the daily prayers, corresponding to the daily Talmud offerings. Let's read the Brisa. A Brisa is basically a Mishnah that wasn't included in the actual edit of the official Mishnahs, but it's a transcript of the oral Torah. Okay, here it goes. Let's read it. We have support for both of them. So the Brisa that supports Rabbi Yosef ben Chanina states as follows: Abraham established the morning prayer Shachris, as it says. Abraham awoke early in the morning, going to the place where he had stood. This verse in Genesis 19 is not just telling us about the happenstance, weather, or the time of day. It's significant. It's specific to tell us that Abraham awoke early in the morning, going to the place where he had stood. So in other words, standing in this verse refers to nothing other than prayer. Where do we find that stand? The term stand is used in connection with prayer, as it says in the Torah. In Tehillim, and Pinchas stood up and prayed. So from there we learn that standing is connected to prayer. When it says that Abraham stood up early in the morning, it means that he prayed early in the morning. From here we learn that Abraham prayed in the morning. Yitzchak established the mincha prayer, as it says, and Isaac went out to speak in the field towards evening. And speak in the verse refers to nothing other than prayer. Where do we find the term speak is used in connection with prayer? As it says in Tehillim, a prayer of the afflicted man, when he swoons and before Hashem he pours forth his speech. So we see that speech is associated with prayer. And Isaac went out to speak in the field toward evening, sort of twilight before sunset, right? And Yaakov on page 275, Yaakov established the Ma'ariv prayer, the evening, as it says, and he encountered the place, and he spent the night there. The word encountered, Vayifga, the root of that word is Paga. Pagia in this verse refers to nothing other than prayer. Where do we find the term Pagia used in connection with prayer? As it says in Jeremiah, as for you, do not pray for this people, and do not take up on their behalf a cry and prayer, and a prayer, do not entreat me, tifga. So this verb, tifga, is used in the context of prayer. So once again, we have three sources of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob praying at different times of day. From here we learn, we get a biblical source, or an oral Torah source, for the origin of our daily prayers. Okay? Very nice. Velvel Laser is saying thank you for, congratulations to our community for having a new table for Torah study. Thank you, Keith. Good. Now, so that's good. Now, I want to ask you a question. What's the significance? Who cares? Who cares about what the origin of prayer is? Is it from the sages? Is it from the offerings? What's the significance? Does it matter to you which one it is? Doesn't really make a difference to your life, right?
I'm lost. But
Why are you lost? Which part loses you?
I don't know how to fit this in with all my other studies and so forth. I don't
Well,
know where it fits.
First thing I want to ask you is put on your seatbelt. That's the first thing I'm going to ask you. Put on your seatbelt.
I have it on.
Enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. Look, think of it as foundations of faith. Think about this study as foundations of faith. Foundations. You know, you're missing a lot of foundations, right? I mean, you might not even, you know that we do pray, right? Do you know that we pray 3 times a day?
Yes.
Good. So there we go. We're at the start. We got some sort of context. Now, why do we pray 3 times a day, Rabbi? Well, here it is. Foundations of faith. That wasn't too difficult. Now, there's 2 opinions as to the origin of our faith. But who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
Like, what difference does it make? So here comes Chassidus, the mystical component of Torah. And what's going to happen, you'll notice, I won't do it right now, but Chassidus, and often I do this in my sermons and my teachings, is I'll connect the Chassidic, the mystical part of Torah, with the Talmud, some sort of Talmud that doesn't really have anything to do with the price of cheese in China. And then when you bring in the Chassidus and you're like, whoa, it opens our eyes when we suddenly realize things in the right context. But what the Talmud is doing is laying foundations of faith. But they're not necessarily clear to us. So by learning the Talmud, what you're doing is think of it like meat and potatoes, right? Think of it like meat and potatoes. This is the foundations of Judaism. But now what Hasidus does is it provides you cutlery, napkins, right? Glasses, crockery. So basically it gives you the utensils to be able to engage with the foundations of faith. So let's think of it that way, right? Foundations of faith. Let's keep on going. A second brisa. So what's the second brisa? So this is the source for the rabbis being the origin of the 3 daily prayers with the daily sacrifices. And once the daily sacrifices ceased in the story that I told you, the rabbis needed to replace the daily sacrifices, so they instituted prayer. Right? The brisa that supports Rabbi Shimon Levi, the second opinion, states as follows: why did the sages say in our Mishnah that the Shacharis prayer may be recited until noon? You're only supposed to daven until noon. The morning prayer. And Rabbi Yehuda says Shachris may be recited until 4 hours into the day. There's something called Zman Tefillah. Let's talk about this, guys. Zman Tefillah. I'm going to open my app over here. Here's my phone, right? I'm going to open my phone. And I'm going to go to the Siddur app. If you know what the Siddur app is, it's on the top left over there, right? It's the blue Siddur app. If you go to the App Store, you look up Kehot Siddur, right? Kehot. There's something called Halachic Times. You click on the thing, Halachic Times. I don't know if you can see it over here. Sorry. Well, maybe you can. Either way. It says over here that the latest Shema today, Shema Yisrael, is at 9:54 a.m. You only have till the end of 3 hours to Shema. But the latest Shacharis is today at 11:03 a.m. Changes a little bit every day because it depends on sunrise, sunset. 11:03 a.m. This is the latest time to daven. Now midday is at 1:23 p.m. today. Right? 1:23 p.m. is midday, but the latest Shacharis is at 11:03 a.m. So why is it that Rabbi Yehuda?
You're saying that there actually are times every single day that changes that you do certain prayers?
No, there's the time limits to those prayers.
Time limits.
Yeah.
After which you can't do.
Yeah. So the morning prayer may be recited until noon. Now, by the way, just to be clear, we as a generation of spiritually challenged individuals, even if you missed the 11:03 a.m. or the noon, do it anyways later. Just do it anyways later. We're not at that spiritual stature that we get stuck with those specific times. And there's various reasons for that. I'm not getting into it right now. But I just want to encourage you, don't get too stuck. In other words, definitely should pray before the time. But if you missed it, b'diavad, that's called, if you did, if it happened, ex post facto, then you just do it anyways, right? So why is it that sages say that you're allowed to pray until noon, and that Rabbi Yehuda says, or maybe only until 4 hours into the day? The reason is because of the daily offering was only offered until noon. Right? So basically, that's a source that we see that the daily offerings is until noon. One more piece I want to share with you before we go deeper. I'm going to page 277. So that's it. We got two sources for our positions there. Page 277, Rabbi Lezer says, anyone who prays the silent Amida while standing behind his teacher, or who greets his teacher as he would an ordinary person, or who returns his teacher's greeting as he would to an ordinary person, or who challenges the yeshiva of his teacher, or who says something that he did not hear from his teacher, causes the divine presence to depart from Israel. All of these is a form of haughtiness. Right? It's all a form of haughtiness. Basically, when you exhibit ego, we learned this in Tanya, when you exhibit ego, you're banishing the presence of God from Israel. But let's go back a little bit deeper. Just dive a little bit deeper into the notes here, bottom of page 275. Yeah. What?
Does it say here why we don't do a repetition of the Amida in Mari? I heard that it was associated with Yaakov having established.
So that's going to be an interesting difference. When you go into the origins and you start noticing discrepancies between the various prayers. Yeah. So why do we do the repetition of the Amida? It's basically for the people that don't know how to pray. That's why we do the repetition.
Why don't we do it in Mari?
Why don't we do it in Ma'ariv? Well, when you look at the reason being based on the offerings, then it's really the morning and the afternoon. The whole evening service is really just like a follow-up to the afternoon service. You don't do a follow-up to the follow-up, right? The question is on Yaakov. I don't remember that right now.
Okay.
But suffice it to say that both reasons are true. Both reasons are true. It's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it's the sages that instituted. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the note in 275. The prayers and the patriarchs. The Gemara presents two views on whether the daily prayers were instituted by the patriarchs or by the man of the Great Assembly. Many authorities maintain that there's really no dispute. Endorsement for this understanding is found in the Rambam, where he follows one view, and the other one in another part of the Rambam, where he says a different view, right? So basically, Maimonides tells us both views. Some explain that the precedent set by the patriarchs in their own lives was not enough to legally obligate the Jewish people. For this reason, it was necessary for the men of the Great Assembly to formally establish the ancient practice as a binding part of Jewish law. So basically, it's not mutually exclusive options. They're both correct. Even with the lawmaking authority of the men of the Great Assembly, the patriarchs filled an important role in paving the way for the sages' work. When Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov began reciting the daily prayers, they not only anticipated the practice that later became a national standard, but they also laid the groundwork for the prayers of later generations. That is, by using their special relationship with God to communicate with Him through the daily prayers, they set in place the spiritual lines of communication that we use to this very day to send our prayers heavenward in an effective way. I just want you to think about this for a moment. Think about how preposterous a notion it is that a mortal being is able to speak to his maker. Think about that. I mean, that's a bold idea. Think of the chess piece having a conversation with the chess master. Wouldn't cross my mind. When you realize that God is infinite and almighty, and I'm just puny, finite, and defined, how on earth would I ever have the audacity to ever approach and speak to my maker? Think about that. Think about what it would be if, think of the awe that you feel when you stand in the presence of a very important person. Let's say a big politician. Would you feel like you could just go up to the President of the United States or to Prime Minister of Israel and just feel like you could start chatting with them? Well, today we don't really have truly great men. But when you have somebody who's truly great, like an Albert Einstein, if you bumped into an Albert Einstein. If you bumped into Maimonides, would you be like, hey, Rabbi, what's... respect. And that's just a human being. Think about the master of the universe. This idea that you can talk to the master of the universe is an idea that needed to be trailblazed by our forefathers, the giants of humanity, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To say that we can communicate with God, that God actually is listening when I am talking to him, that is such a revolutionary concept. It's unreal. Animals can't talk to God. The novelty of a human being is that he's a speaker, he's a medaber. There's 4 strata within creation. The inanimate, doimem. The word doimem, inanimate in Hebrew, translates as silent. The silent kingdom, which is, the inanimate. What in Hebrew it means that they don't speak, like stones and water. They don't speak. Then there's the vegetable kingdom, that which grows. Then there's chai, the animal kingdom, which is that which is alive. But only the human being is called the medaber, the speaker. Only the human being was given the gift of speech, the gift of gab, to be able to communicate with God. And the fact that God is actually interested in hearing what you have to say is an idea which is extremely invigorating. It's very exciting. An idea that you could not have come up with on your own. You needed the giants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to open our eyes and our hearts to blaze those trails. To illustrate this idea, Rabbi Elia Lopian draws an analogy to the telephone system. To make a phone call, one merely picks up the phone and dials the appropriate number. The average person does not think about the arduous task of stretching millions of miles of telephone wires across the globe, atop tall wooden poles and deep underwater for placing satellites in order to relay signals. This tremendous yet mostly forgotten feat noticeably facilitates every phone call made ever since. In a similar way, our prayers rely on the patriarchs' even greater feats of connecting heaven and earth by means of the spiritual network they constructed by means of their precedent-setting prayers. So in other words, the sages, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were the ones that made the Wi-Fi connection. They paired the phone to the car. They downloaded the Wi-Fi signal here. They put up the tower. They're like, okay, now it's open. You can relate to that analogy, right? So now the connection's open. Now just pick up the phone and make the call. The President of the United States was welcoming the Prime Minister of Israel. Remember those days? And he greeted him warmly. He welcomed him. And the Prime Minister of Israel noticed a red telephone on the president's desk. So what's this bright red telephone? Oh, that's a phone call direct to God. That's a direct line to God. Really? Can I make a call? Mr. Prime Minister, it's very expensive. You can make a call, but it's $1 million a minute. $1 million a minute. You know what? Budgets? Okay, I can make a call. A little while later, the Prime Minister of Israel welcomes the president in Jerusalem. He notices there's a red telephone on his desk. He says, what's this? Telephone direct to God? Really? How much is it cool? He says, 10 cents. 10 cents a minute. What? How could that be? Prime Minister smiles and he says, here, it's a local call. It's the sages, it's our ancestors that blazed that trail for us and gave us that ability to connect. Let's just do one more piece before we wrap it up for today. Let's just do this little piece of the 3 daily prayers on page 276. According to Mabit, the 3 daily prayers represent the different needs of man. The morning prayer said after one awakens from his death-like sleep acknowledges God as the one who restores one's soul in the morning. Further, the morning prayer is an expression of gratitude for the gift of another day of life. So the morning prayer is like a gift. It's like a gratitude context. The afternoon prayer, typically offered after a day of work and one's occupation in the pursuit of livelihood, acknowledges God as the force behind all our efforts to sustain ourselves. So that's related more to business, financial. The evening prayer corresponds to the other less crucial human needs. It is therefore less obligatory than the first 2 prayers. That's interesting. So the first prayer is associated with life and gratitude for being alive. The afternoon prayer is associated with financial success, which is critical. And the third one is more like everything else. In a second approach, Mabit writes that the 3 prayers correspond to the 3 stages in a person's lifetime. Morning relates to youth, which is the beginning of life. Mincha is the middle age, and Ma'ariv is the old age. The prayers remind us that one must persevere in serving God through all these stages and not put off his spiritual obligations until shortly before death. In this scheme, too, it is appropriate that the evening prayer is less obligatory, for the elderly are not capable of serving God to the same extent as the young people. You're not old. According to the Maharal of Prague, by means of the 3 prayers, a person surrenders to Hashem the 3 pillars of his existence: the body, the soul, and his wallet, which corresponds to B'chol Levavecha, U'B'chol Nafshecha, U'B'chol Me'idecha. Marty, this one is for you. I know we've had this debate before. I hope you're still with us, Marty. That we say in the Shema Yisrael, and you shall love God, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your money. Right? Now, Marty doesn't like my interpretation. I'm going to give you the exact translation. B'chol levavecha is with all your hearts, plural. B'chol levavecha with all your hearts, plural. You know, we have 2 souls, animal soul and godly soul. U'b'chol nafshecha with all your life. Okay, that's body, soul. Okay, makes sense. And the third one is u'b'chol me'idecha, and with all your very.
Oh, your what?
Very. Very. With all your very. What's your very? Your intensity. What's your intensity? So the sages interpret that to mean with all your money. Let's see. So the Maharal says that the 3 daily prayers correspond to body, soul, and money. With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your money. When sleeping at night, one allows his body to dominate. As he enters a state in which his soul is inoperative, remember, sleep is 1/60th of death. And so, awakening in a timely fashion, despite the bodily desire to sleep late, one effectively surrenders his body to the fulfillment of God's will. So when you're sleeping, your body dominates over your soul. When you wake up, you're making the decision to allow the soul to dominate over the body, which means you're surrendering your body to God. In the latter part of the daytime, that's why the morning prayer relates to the body. In the latter part of the daytime, when one is typically occupied with earning a living and one nevertheless interrupts his activities and recites the mincha prayers, he now is surrendering his resources, his money, to the cause of fulfilling God's will, right? Because you're in the middle of the workday. My grandfather, Reb Shalom, their stoller, Reb Shalom, the carpenter in Jerusalem, he was a carpenter, and his son, my uncle, still runs the carpentry store till this day. There's a street full of carpenters, and every day at 3:15 p.m., all the carpenters would close their stores in the middle of the workday. They'd all go to my grandfather's store, Reb Shalom, and there they would daven together a mincha, 15, 20 minutes, and then they go back to work, right? And I was always amazed by this. Like, you're in the middle of work. How you start? And they would stop to work in the middle of the day at 3:15, and they would go and do the mincha. In the evening, so that's why the afternoon service is relating to your finances, your very. In the evening, after a strenuous day's work, when one seeks to rest his soul, because you're exhausted, the animal soul or the soul of mobility, which powers his ability to move about and be active, and he defies his weariness in order to recite the evening prayer because you're exhausted, and still he manages to pull himself together to pray, to overcome his tiredness. He surrenders his soul to Hashem's rule. So the morning prayer was instituted by Abraham, the first of the patriarchs, at the dawn of the patriarchal era. The afternoon prayer was instituted by Isaac, the middle patriarch, and the evening prayer was instituted by Jacob, last of the patriarchs, in the twilight of the patriarchal era. Okay, so that just gives us a little background of here. I see Marty is digging in his heels. He still says, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your resources. Oh, well, that's good. Then you agree with me. Resources is money, is it not? No, you were saying resources versus money. I don't know. Is there a difference in resources and money? Is there a difference? No, my legal team here does not allow that such a discrepancy. So overruled. Sorry, what?
Doesn't it say with all your might?
It says with all your might. But what is with all your might? No, the exact translation of the word, the Hebrew translation is b'chol modecha, with all your very, which means, could be liberally translated to be your might. But what is a man's might? You know, Murphy's Law, he who has the gold makes the rules, right?
Strength.
Oh, that's not Murphy's Law?
No.
Whose law was that?
The kings.
Oh, the King's Law. What is Murphy's Law?
Whatever can go wrong.
Well- Okay, who's Murphy anyways? All right, fine. One last piece here. Reb Avram of Sachashav, let's just finish this up. The Avnei Nezer explains that Yaakov instituted the evening prayer because he lived a life with many troubles. Think about it, Yaakov. You know, Yaakov, Jacob. Think about it. Jacob he was supposed to marry the one wife. First of all, he had to run away from Esau. In the womb, he had competition, right? He had a competition with Esau, and Esau was fighting with him. And then he marries, he runs away from Esau, and then he wants to marry Rachel, and ends up marrying Leah because his father-in-law messes around with him. Then he has to face, then his daughter is kidnapped and raped. Then his sons kill the people that raped his daughter. Then Joseph is kidnapped. I mean, Jacob is dealing with all sorts of struggles his whole life. So Jacob was the one that instituted the evening prayer because his life was like in nighttime, was in the darkness. It's easy to pray in the daylight, right? It's easy to thank God when things are good. But how about when things are dark? When you're a Jacob, right? So Jacob instituted the evening prayer because he lived a life of many troubles. He suffered through one misfortune to another. He was hounded by enemies like Esau and Laban, his father-in-law, who yearned to destroy him. He was forced to leave home and to go into exile accordingly. Yaakov represents the Jewish people in times of exile and hardship. This is the evening prayer. When it's dark around you and you're lonely and you're cold. During these periods of darkness, when Hashem seems to have withdrawn from his special relationship with the Jewish people, it is very difficult to approach God and to pray with confidence and one's pleas are receiving God's sympathetic attention. Dealing with the same challenge, Jacob promoted the principle that even in such times, a Jew has no one to turn to for help other than God, and that he has no choice but to approach and pray to him. So even though you feel like you're all alone and you've been abandoned, the evening service reminds us that when you're all alone, maybe the reason why God allows you to be all alone is because he wants you to realize that you have no one to turn to but him. This is why the formula of emes ve'emunah, truth and faith, true and faithful, which emphasizes the need for faith, is recited right after the Shema Yisrael in the evening service for praying, in the sense that God is hiding with his countenance requires faith, that God has adopted his policy of concealment for our own good, so that we may remain strong in our devotion even during the night of the exile, out of the conviction that God never actually means to hide. That Hashem never actually means to hide from or abandon a member of his chosen people. I just want to remind you, the faith is having the courage to take the first step when you can't see the staircase. It's easy to have faith when times are good. Faith is required when times are tough. And that's what the evening service represents. When it's dark and it's cold and we're alone and we're hounded by all sorts of troubles, it's then that we need to pray the evening service. And I want to encourage you to consider doing this, to take on the Shema Esrei, the silent Amidah of the evening service, to pray to God. You know, we're going through difficult times these days. With anti-Semitism and the war and all sorts of other troubles. These are difficult times. It might be very appropriate for us to pray the evening service at home on our own and to be able to find that faith amidst the darkness. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Please don't go away to my live audience. That's what I want.